back, everybody, to the Land Between the Meadows, the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm here, your host, Jameson Cable, and we are moving on with our county-by-county discussion. We're moving away from Lincoln County, finally, but we're moving on to the hometown, or at least the home county of myself, Rockcastle County. And to liven things up, we got a local history teacher, Mr. Daniel Hopkins. Tell us about yourself, Daniel.
With an intro like that was fantastic. Jameson, I appreciate you having me on here this evening. My name is Daniel Hopkins. I'm from Lancaster. Jameson and I have been friends for a long time, but I'm a history teacher at Garrett County High School, and really interested in really all sorts of history, but local history is something that interests me. You don't know this, Jameson, but for several years I was the vice president of the Garrett County Historical Society.
Oh, that is.
Yeah, so you had that going on, but connected to Garrett and Lincoln and Rockcastle a little bit as well. So looking forward to this discussion and maybe learning a little bit as well.
Well, and it's good. It's good to have you. I kind of have gotten lonely talking to myself about Lincoln County, and which is a lot to say. There's a lot to talk about, I guess, when it comes to local history. The plan is for I'm going to try to lead the way here with the Rockcastle stuff, and then maybe we can do kind of a parallel. Talk about Garrett an episode. Go back to Rockcastle, back and forth, and so forth. With the Rockcastle County, we really have a few main cities, towns to talk about, and then and a few big I would think attractions as far as Renfro Valley and Great Saltpeter Cave. You have Broadhead, Mount Vernon, and Livingston, and of course, like all communities in and around everywhere, there's loads of small communities in Rockcastle as well, and we throw them a bone here and there. With the smaller communities, it's always harder to get a more visual or just to get more information about those places. I have the luck of having two books that I guess I'm using as a resource, and I'll flash them up here, up in front of the camera here. Rockcastle Recollections by John Lyer, and he spent a lot of his later years in life kind of trying to document a lot of Rockcastle and what happened here, there, and everywhere. And it's a really good book, really good read as far as if you're interested in Rockcastle history, of course. And I don't really know if you can even buy it anywhere anymore. So I know you can't get it on Amazon or anything, but so it's a really good. It's got a good narrative, I guess, if you want to call it that, of the county and so forth. But then the other one is this big, huge Rockcastle County, Kentucky, and its people that was done. Both these books came out in 1992, I think. But the John Lyer book, interesting enough, he actually died, I think, before the book came out. But he put a lot of work into it, and it's a real good read.
One of the things that's unique about Rockcastle County is, it was created as a county a bit later. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Rockcastle County is pretty much right at the fork where the Wilderness Road into Kentucky. You pretty much had to make the decision: do you want to go to Harrodsburg or do you want to go to Boonesboro? It's always been funny to me that Rockcastle is, it's sort of right there, but Stanford and Crab Orchard, and then on up to Richmond, that they sort of get a lot more discussion historically than Rockcastle does.
Very, very true. And when you look at, like, I've been talking about Lincoln a lot, and it gets a lot of credit, and it's I was trying to find Lincoln can be considered the mother of Kentucky counties because so many counties came from Lincoln.
Sure.
And I was trying to find like a name of sort for Rockcastle, but I can't find one. I was never able to kind of locate or say it's this county. It's just Rockcastle. Nothing that I could, I guess, relate or connect it to. Yeah, I kind of understand what you're saying, because the traces, our trails kind of divided, and a lot of people went to Boonesboro and a lot of people went to Harrod, and the story of many counties in Kentucky and immigration in general, you have big groups of people who are coming across, and they just they'll stop here, they'll stop there. This family will say, hey, we're going to stop here, and people keep going. And a lot of people had that final destination of Boonesboro and Fort Herod, but there was people along the way that stopped, and those people stopped in Rockcastle and Crab Orchard and so forth. But real quickly, just a little bit of statistical data, I guess if you want to say that. But on January 8th, 1810 is when Rockcastle was formed from Lincoln, Pulaski, Madison, and Knox counties. And it was the 52nd county that was formed in Kentucky. And this was in 1810. And you think about Kentucky was formed in what year?
1792.
Good job. Correct.
I wasn't sure what you were asking right there. Where we were going.
So 18 years. In 18 years, there was 52 counties. But also in that year, Butler County and Grayson County was also formed in Kentucky. But Rockcastle was the big number 52. So the almost in. I don't want to try to do the math real quick. I was going to say almost in the first third, but I was like, that math's not going to be right. So, but anyway, you know about Thomas Walker, right?
Sure.
So old Thomas Walker begins.
Tommy Walker.
Yeah, he pops up all the time, man. I mean, anytime you start talking about Kentucky, he's got some sort of footprint in it. But during his travels, we know he named the Cumberland River and all that good stuff. But while he was in the area of Rockcastle County, he named the river, the Lawless River, and he encamped there. And he mentioned while he was there, he talked about how big these rock shelters were along the river, and that was pretty much that. But that was the only thing that he really contributed to the county, and it won't even last that long.
So let me ask you this then.
Yes, go ahead.
Lawless River. That name can work a couple of different ways. That's a last name of some people. You'll sometimes see that. But also that can be used to sort of describe actions, or, I could see the river being described as being lawless if it's, going, crazy and wild and all of that. Do you know if lawless was like a fellow traveler, or if it was, this river is hard to get down?
With you bringing that up, I would say that it had to do with probably the river rapids, because it's a shame, I guess, that I'm from Rockcastle County and I've never really been on the river. I've seen it, of course, many times, and camped beside it and this and that, but I've never rode rapids of the river. But the rapids on Rockcastle River can get pretty hectic. I think it's class 3 is the technical term, and I don't know I think class 5 might be the roughest rapids. I'm not a river person.
Class 5 is really the roughest that people can ride. Class 6 is like you can't be on it. Really, but I've done some whitewater rafting, canoeing, and that kind of stuff. And if you're on a class 3 rapid, it's pretty good. And it, I don't want to skip ahead 200 years here, but like now you mentioned Livingston, they do, that's a launch for rafting and kayaking.
So I would think that it got that name from the Lawless River, probably by the river's difficulty to navigate and the rapids of the river. Good job. See, it was a very good positive to have you on here. We wouldn't have known that. So anyway, about 13 years after that, another hunting group or I guess you could say maybe the first hunting group. Daniel Boone's running around here all over the place, so it's hard to say which hunting group this is involved in. But there's a few people these people's names are very important because they come out, and a group led by Elisha Walden. And in this group is a guy named Charlie Cox and Henry Skaggs. And I bring them up just basically because they come into play a little bit later. And that's that. Another hunting group comes through and so forth. But then another group, and this one is the important group, a group of hunters come in about 3 years later with a guy named Isaac Lindsay. And while he's on the Lawless River, he starts to notice these big shelving cliffs, these big, rock hangovers, and it reminds him of castles, and he refers to them as rock castles. And as he keeps going down the river, he comes upon a huge, massive, rock that reminds him of an ancient castle, and he referred to it as Castle Rock. And so with all that, these rock castles and the Castle Rock, he names the river Rockcastle. And there you have the coveted name of where Rockcastle County gets its name from, the river. I don't know, maybe you could answer this question. I don't know how when it comes to how are they naming things back there? Did they just say, what, I named this, and then this other dude comes in and says, what, I'm changing this name? Or is it just like, I don't know this name? I mean, is that how it went? Is that?
Well, I think we have a tendency to think that everybody that came into the state, it was a straight line in one direction.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There wasn't a ton of people that went to Boonesboro or Fort Herod that moved back to Virginia or North Carolina.
Yeah.
But there was a pretty steady stream of people moving back and forth across each other, coming in contact with each other. And, in a time when you had no such thing as roads, you had no maps or atlases really to speak of, your descriptors played a massive role. And, if you named a town Mount Vernon or Stanford or Richmond or whatever you did, then that sort of grew up around it. But, in a wild and perhaps lawless, the best way to describe the area is the Castle Rock area, the Rockcastle area. And so a lot of times descriptor names are what stuck,
Yeah.
I think that's where you get green rivers and red rivers and those kind of things. And a lot of times I think we want to search for fancy names or reasoning, and a lot of times it's really the absolute dumb answer. Like, that's just what it looked like, so that's what people call it.
Yeah, because they saw a big rock and it looked like a castle. So yeah. But as I mentioned before, this guy named Henry Skaggs. So on his expedition, Skaggs follows this buffalo. They're hunting. These are hunting parties. That's what they're doing. So he follows this buffalo. And before I do that, let me bring up a quick map of Rockcastle, and just if you're watching, you can kind of understand what we're talking about a little bit. So looking at this map here, can you see it, Daniel?
Yes.
All right. So over here on the right, this is where everybody's coming in at it, and this is of course kind of a more modern map as well. But this is the eastern part of the county, and this is where these first settlers are coming in. Right, you can see Livingston right here and so forth, and you can see the river is basically the entire southeastern border is the river. So this is where this is taking place at, and so Henry Skaggs is on this hunting party, and he is near the river and so forth. But then there's a stream that cuts off of the river, and he follows this buffalo. And as he's following this buffalo, he follows this creek to a certain point, and this creek then becomes Skaggs Creek, which is still referred to today. If I can find a better map, I'll have to bring it up just a bit more detailed and so forth. But anyway, he follows this buffalo though for miles and miles, and to the point to where he keeps going, and he makes it all the way over to the eastern part of or to the western part of the county, which would be more towards Dix River and that part of the county. And now this trace, or his path that he carved or cut through, however you want to refer to it as, becomes known as Skaggs Trace. And that is the first documentation or the first named place, I guess, by a European or by I guess you can refer to him as an American at that point as well. So that's the first trace or the first road that you can name in Rockcastle, or was named in Rockcastle. So there you have it, Skaggs Trace. That's it. That's why. But of course, if we want to talk about Kentucky and the county, you got to bring up old Daniel Boone, because he's running through this place up and down all over the place for the first who knows how many years. he was there. Old Boone, he is in a lot of hunting parties as well. But here's a good connection. We were talking about Great Saltpeter Cave. Well, one of Boone's buddies was John Stewart, who he hunted with a lot, and they were on a hunting trip, and old John Stewart went up missing. And of course, after a certain amount of time, he ended up being dead. He had died. But they found his bones near a hollowed out sycamore tree that was really close to the Great Saltpeter Cave. And that is kind of the first, I guess, documented mention of the Great Saltpeter Cave. And saltpeter, of course, was used for ammunition.
Right.
It played a pretty good role in Rockcastle for a
So let me ask you this then, for someone who maybe is not from the area.
Yes.
Can you give like a description of where the Great Saltpeter Cave is? Like, is it close to town, or is it in the middle of nowhere? Can it be visited? Does it even really exist anymore?
Oh, yes, it is very much.
Yes, but does it
true. Yeah. Well, so it is near Louisville. It is near Livingston. It is near Livingston in the eastern part of the county. And two, let me back up and talk a little bit more about Rockcastle geographically to help out a bit. Rockcastle is south of Madison County, north of Laurel County, and it's right on 75. And oftentimes, whenever I mentioned, depending on who you're talking to, they consider Rockcastle Eastern Kentucky. Some people may consider it South Central, but it's very unique too, as far as its geography goes. Because if you cut it right down the middle in the west side of 75 versus the east side of 75, you get kind of the split of the regions. The east side is a lot more rocky and a lot more mountains, more like Eastern Kentucky. As far as the west side, though, is a bit more hilly, a lot more farmland. And it's one of those things. A lot of people would say, well, you're from Eastern Kentucky, and me personally, I don't really feel as much like I'm from Eastern Kentucky because my wife is from Hazard, and that is Eastern Kentucky. Right. It's not exactly the same, but that's
too. It's kind of this won't make a lot of sense if you've not actually been there, but to me, like visually, you can tell like where US 150.
Yeah,
and the bypass around the sort of the northeast-ish bypass of Mount Vernon, where those two roads connect. It's like if you're sitting at that intersection, it's like you can see flat in one direction and you can see hills behind you. It's almost like when you describe that road being a divider, it's almost like it's right there. Like depending on which way I turn, I'm going to Eastern Kentucky or I'm going to Southern Kentucky.
That's very true. So with that, I mean, as far as the county goes, the county geography, that's kind of a big. I mean, that's just kind of my thoughts on it. I'm 606 area code, so I guess that's Eastern Kentucky. But it's hard to necessarily be exactly to define it that way. But it's very different geographically. And on the eastern side, though, that's where you get the river is primarily on the eastern side. The cave is on the eastern side, and just more, it's just more mountainy. That's just the way it is. So the cave is, I don't know exactly, but it's a few miles from Livingston. It is still operating today. As far as you can go visit it, you can go take tours, and I've actually been in contact with the friends of Great Saltpeter Cave, or the operators, the people who run it. And I've set up the time to talk to them. We've been in contact. We had plans, obviously, to do it before now, but the coronavirus kind of halted all those. But I had plans to talk to them about more, and they're going to be able to bring a lot more information that just the things you can do presently. Schools go there on field trips and this and that. So it's very, it's very operational, I guess you could say. It would be nice if they would put more of a campground there, because I think it would get a lot more tourist activity and stuff like that. But cavers, it's a great cave site for people who enjoy going and doing cave crawls, or that kind of stuff. I personally don't like cave crawling or anything like that. Not that I'm claustrophobic, but that's going to
have to be a visit. Just myself, my wife, I'd say if I recommended we were going to a cave, we'd probably swing by like the divorce courthouse before we went to it, if I was just guessing.
So I guess, does that clear up your I mean, is that a good description, you think?
Yeah. I think, if you have some semblance of an understanding of what Rockcastle is and what the geography is, then, that kind of gives you an idea of where it was.
So the main thing here is, as far as like, all these settlers are coming in, all these hunters are coming in, and they're having just, I mean, the Cumberland Gap or the Cumberland, Boone Trace, all these trails, I guess you could call them, roads, are just, people are coming in, more and more people, and Daniel Boone's hunting, Squire Boone's hunting here. All these people are running around Rockcastle, hunting and making their Skaggs Trace and so forth. So the big finding or the question is, who settled in Rockcastle first? Who is known as the first house, or the first people who laid down land? And that's one thing in the John Lyer book that he constantly was trying to debate and figure out in genealogical and records to figure out who was the first person. So we kind of don't necessarily 100% know, but there's a lot to go by. And I got just a few of these things here that we'll go through, and I'll kind of just talk about some of the things that they did. Question for you, Mr. Hopkins. How did people acquire land in Kentucky in the first place?
So I think one of the ways that you saw people legally acquire land was through land grants. And a lot of that was born out of necessity from the Revolutionary War, when the government had no real means of being able to pay soldiers for what they had done, but they had a wide open swath of land that they could give to people. In truth, 1,000 acres or 100 acres or whatever it might be in Kentucky, long term was probably more valuable than any amount of coin that they could have given to a citizen of one of the 13 colonies. I would imagine there were probably some people that would have liked a little bit of cash in hand instead. But those land grants and that was a big that was a big way of getting people there. And I'm sure you've talked about it in some other episodes, but guys like Boone, Simon Kenton came into the state, or into Kentucky, what would eventually be the state, that they came in surveying, and by all accounts were pretty terrible at surveying. And so you have plots that are 1,000 acres, you have plots that ran from the big tree to the other big tree. It had a lot of overlapping. And so, when people say that they got a certain amount of land, there's some plus minus on that as well. But that was one of the biggest ways that sort of brought, I guess you would say, sort of legitimized settlement in the area. Prior to that, it was sort of like you've been talking about, hunting parties, sort of people sort of drifting in, maybe troubles led them that way or whatever it might be. Even Boone goes back to North Carolina and brings his family, brings his family in. But some of those early legitimate, like, I actually have property that I'm going to, were, because of land grants from the war.
Well, it's good. It's funny you bring up Boone, because Boone he just loved to be out in the wilderness. I don't think he was.
What's the old story? Like, he saw smoke from a chimney and said that his neighbors were too close or something.
Yeah. But that's the thing. That's the thing to consider is, you said legally, and you had all these people, and this happened all over Kentucky, and you had these people who were given these land grants, and then some of them never even claimed them. Some of them never even came to the county, and that's an issue that when you're trying to find out who established or who was the first settler in Rockcastle County, you've got people who had land grants here, but they never showed up. There was never any record of them being here. So then go ahead.
we think about a land grant, and we think about if somebody, we look back 200 years ago, if you'd given me 1,000 acres in Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
I would have absolutely said yes. But if you think about this, if you're a soldier and, from Virginia or from North Carolina, you did see some like Rhode Island and Pennsylvania drift down as well. But most of the settlers would have been from Virginia, North Carolina by this point. If you've been fighting in the Revolutionary War for years
Mm-hmm.
away from your family, and then you come home to your family and you say, okay, I don't have any money, but we're going to move to Kentucky.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there were probably a lot of wives and a lot of other people in the family that said, I'm not interested in doing that.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, these land grants, there probably were a lot of people at home that said, I don't want to move. Mm-hmm. Or people maybe went home to a situation and they realized, maybe, their situation was better at where they actually were. So, today we would say, those people were stupid not to make that move. But a lot of people just didn't because it wasn't feasible, or maybe it was not what the other people, wanted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's probably, just think about if you rolled in and said, "Hey guys, we're all moving." Right. Daddy, I ain't seen you in 3-4 years. What do you mean we're moving? So and that's the first person I bring up is a guy by the name of John Cobb had a 1,000-acre land grant signed by Patrick Henry, but there was no evidence ever of anybody settling there during that time, or during the time after the land grant was issued. So you have those people like that. Another example would be Jacob Myers was a name that was supposed to be living near Skaggs Creek, but there's no real evidence of when he settled or anything like that. And the other end of the hunt, I guess if you want to say it that way, is Rockcastle was part of Lincoln County. So for the first 10, 20 years, all the documents for Rockcastle were technically Lincoln County, and then over the next 100 years, most places kept their documents in their courthouse. Rockcastle County's courthouse burned. I know it burned at least once, and it may have even burned twice. So those documents are all then lost, and it becomes this real big guessing game, hunting down this and that. And you got censuses. Did I say that right? Census. That is there a plural for census?
I think I don't know. Sensei.
But there's a bunch of these names. There's a bunch of people who you can talk about. The one that is probably that has records and has backing that he was there is a guy by the name of Stephen Langford, and he was most likely settled in Rockcastle around 1790, but it was still Lincoln County at that time. So the records show though that he had 400 acres near Little Clifty Creek near the Rockcastle River, and I don't really know where Little Clifty Creek is right off, but that's where he settled. That's the way it says. But there's another tricky thing, and I don't know how much genealogy you've ever done, and I've done basically none, but there was another Stephen Langford, and this guy was a little bit later, I think, than the Stephen Langford that we mentioned first, and he settled more near Mount Vernon, and that was more near like 1812. So you got two Stephen Langfords, and the story goes though that there was a group of brothers who came from Virginia, I believe, that they split up though. They came from Virginia and split up, and they went different ways. However, ironically enough, two of those brothers had sons, and they both named them Stephen Langford. So it's very possible, and I believe it is, that those two Stephen Langfords were actually first cousins, and they both ended up settling in Rockcastle near and around, at the beginning, 1790 and 1812. So it's a very interesting story that they both end up at the same place or near the same place, and it's even more confusing to all of us people in 2020 trying to figure out who they are and which one's which. when you have two people with the same name.
So Little Clifty Creek, just doing a little bit of looking for you. It is right about where Rockcastle, Laurel, and Pulaski meet.
Mm-hmm.
If you were going across 80 from Somerset to London, right on the county line, where Pulaski and Laurel meet, and Rockcastle is just barely to the north of that. Well, probably, I don't know, a mile south of that. You wouldn't cross it on a bridge or on a roadway, but that's where the Little Clifty Creek is. And that's where the Little Clifty Creek runs into the Rockcastle River. So, you know, you talk about like Laurel County being created a little bit later. You know, this settlement area, you know, the first settlement there in Rockcastle County might actually not be in Rockcastle County now, just like live in Rockcastle County, but technically it was considered Lincoln. So.
And then that's there's quite. I mean, that's I know where you're talking about now, because some of my family still lives near that peak. I guess that southern peak of where Rockcastle meets the rest of the world, or at least Pulaski and Laurel County, I guess. But anyway, I got a little part here I'm going to read out of this book about this James Proctor guy, who, I'll just read it. You can make your own judgment. James Proctor, who came from Pennsylvania to Rockcastle County at a date now unknown, can justly lay claim to having been one of our first or our oldest settlers. At the time he built his pole cabin in the Cove area, the nearest store from which he could purchase supplies was at Logan's Fort, which is now Stanford, Kentucky. And it took 3 days to make the round trip on foot. So wild and unsettled was the country that bears and panthers would sniff around the door and peer through the cracks between the logs of his cabin at night while he was gone, and his wife and babies cowered in fright under the bed covers. So, some wild terrain in Rockcastle. You have bears and panthers.
Right. Now, what's funny is that bears, for so long gone, are now back. And you know, bears have sort of, I don't know if they've spotted them in Rockcastle County. I'm sure they're there, even if they've not actually been spotted. And of course, they've always, people, you know, the Fish and Wildlife say that there are no panthers or cougars in eastern Kentucky, but pretty much everybody says that there are. I don't know if they've always been there, if they've drifted back and forth. But can you imagine, first of all, just how alone you would be in a place like Kentucky in 1790 or whatever year it was. I don't know what year. What year did you say that was that from? Or
that was from 17. I think it was 1790. Yep.
So just how incredibly alone you are. You know, it talked about 3-day round trip to Stanford. Today it's a 20-minute drive.
Yeah.
So you might as well say you're 100 miles from anywhere, it all things considered. And then you've got, wild animals, creeping around the corner. The bravery and maybe the craziness of those people to go into those areas and settle. And there's some crazy stories about people, going from Fort Logan to Fort Boonesboro to Fort Herod, going to get corn, going to get like supplies, and pretty much risking everything just for the bare necessities. It took a special breed of people to be able to do that.
And on top of that, you think about like Native Americans as well would be another threat, and which, I mean, out of the things I've read so far in Rockcastle, I've not found specifics of Native American attacks. I found a lot of that in the Lincoln history book, which around 1790, and you can go 1800, the Native American attacks were dying down. They were not as severe as at the beginning. It's funny that we talked earlier about the sort of the geography of Rockcastle County, current Rockcastle County, and it's sort of split between mountainous and moving more toward sort of a flatter terrain. I guess more kind of central Kentucky type terrain.
And, there weren't a whole lot of Native Americans in the mountains of what we call Eastern Kentucky today.
Yeah.
You do have Cherokee, but they were more, Tennessee, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And even in Kentucky, there weren't a ton of Native Americans that just always were here.
They weren't living. They didn't live in
right. Other than around Winchester,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was called Shawneetown or something like that up around Winchester, that sort of had a quasi-permanent, more than anything, like when they would drift in for hunting, and they kind of stayed right around there. So most of the Native American encounters that people were going to have in this area were more smaller factions, kind of rambling parties rather than, like a tribe of, you kind of get that image of, Custer in 1876 and the Great Sioux Army. You weren't really seeing that kind of thing here. But the fact that most people that were coming into Kentucky had very little contact with Native Americans, on the Eastern Seaboard, one Indian was strange to you as a settler, and you had no idea what to expect.
So, moving on. Here is the person we can give credit to as far as the first settler in Rockcastle County is a guy by the name of David Lewis, and he came from Petersburg, Virginia, in 1787, and settled about 2 miles west of what is now, presently Mount Vernon. So that guy, that's the person who gets the credit, I guess, as far as if you have to pick somebody. And the thing is, as most history, can go, we don't have it. Everything is not always documented. So, there could be somebody else that was the first, but as far as me and you are concerned, we're giving the lead to David Lewis. And there are still Lewis people, Lewis family. There's a lot of people with a Lewis surname as well that still live in Rockcastle. So, there you go. We give it to him. But there's other houses and stuff as well. Robert Langford, he had a house, and that's I couldn't find exactly the connection that Robert Langford has with Stephen Langford. But they had a house that was built in Rockcastle, and it eventually was used as the first courthouse. And I find it very interesting, which it's, the same thing happened in Lincoln County, and I'm sure many other counties. But when these counties are formed, hey, we have to have a courthouse. Well, how about we go to old Robert's house? Like, well, okay.
He has 2 rooms.
He has 2 rooms. That's perfect. Because like Fort Logan, like they had, like whenever the county seat was moved to Fort Logan, like the requirements were, you're going to have to build a jail in the fort, and you're going to have to build a tavern in the fort, and we'll move to the county seat to Stanford. Okay, that sounds good. I thought that was pretty interesting. So anyway, we talked about the long hunters, and I found this pretty interesting, pretty cool, because a lot of the long hunters that came in those first hunting parties, they then came back and settled in Rockcastle. So they went on these hunting parties in 1790, 1780. Probably some of them probably even 17. I don't know about 1760. That's probably a little too far. That's too early. But the people ended up coming back. So like people like John Baker, James Dysart, I think. Dysart, Valentine, Harmon, all these people came back to Rockcastle, and those people, were established names for so long. Once again, going back to Saltpeter Cave, a guy by the name of George Montgomery took up about 400 acres of Saltpeter Cave around 1802, and I'm trying to think. I believe at that point, that part of the county was Madison County, because Saltpeter Cave was part of Madison County up until, Rockcastle was formed. So that was then Madison County, and I think that's where those deeds are. But the big name of Rockcastle County is old John Renfro, and his wife built their first cabin in Renfro Valley before 1800. So the big name about him is mainly because of Renfro Valley, and that begins, I guess, that lineage there. Have you ever been to Renfro Valley?
I have actually not, which is really weird that you can live this close and have never been. But it's one of those places, like every year you look at the schedule and you're like, I'd like to go to that, or I'd like to go to that, and I just never have.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I'll talk about Renfrew Valley more later, but it is definitely a staple. Historical, Rockcastle, Kentucky, even staple. But yeah, that's the main early settling of Rockcastle that I got, I guess, for today. You got anything else to add, Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, it's really interesting that when you see Rockcastle and all of these other counties that were created, you mentioned some of the names, and some of the names, never really left. There's people in the community today that are named that, and some of the names are weird and almost hard to pronounce because you've never heard them before. And those people may have only stayed for, a year or two, and then they moved further west. I mean, you think about where Rockcastle County is in comparison to the rest of the state, or what's now the state. There's a lot of western land that people could move to and go to. And some of those people, were never heard from in Mount Vernon or Broadhead or never again.
Yeah. And you have that, I guess, that progression of like, somebody who settles down and has 10 kids, and 5, maybe even 8, maybe even all those kids then move out further west and end up populating the whole state. And too, with Rockcastle, it's kind of like that, like we said with the geography. You got out of the mountains. The eastern part of Rockcastle is more mountainy, and in the western, that's when it opens up. It opens up to Richmond. It opens up to Stanford, Danville, Harrodsburg, and so forth. So, you could, let's give it the cool Rockcastle County, the Gateway County. That is its official, or I guess I should say unofficial title we can give it. And whenever I post this podcast, that's what I'm going to put in the description, the Gateway County. And it's going to catch hold, and we're going to run with it.
I'm good.
Another thing I've noticed, comparing Rockcastle to, say, Lincoln County, I feel like with Lincoln, you have these there's just more bigger names as far as Kentucky goes as a whole. You have Logan, you have Shelby, you have Whitley. You have these kind of bigger players that kind of came, but they were there. They were there earlier. They were there, in the 1780s and setting up camp and so forth. So Rockcastle wasn't even formed for 30 more years. So you kind of have that process as well. All right, well, so we're going to wrap that up. I'll tell you, next time we talk about Rockcastle, we'll probably start talking about Mount Vernon. Of course, it's the county seat. A lot of history there. Pertaining. I say a lot of history pertaining to Rockcastle, not really necessarily anything bigger. Renfrew Valley, those kind of things are definitely big in Rockcastle or big in Mount Vernon. But then we'll hit up the smaller towns and attractions. I kind of feel like Renfrew Valley and Saltpeter Cave you can label them as attractions and so forth. And then we'll get who knows, maybe before we even get there, we'll talk about Garrett County a little bit. And former VP of the Garrett Historical Society can lead us down that road.
The home of governors.
All right, so we're going to wrap this up about Rockcastle, at least the first episode, a quick little history of Rockcastle. And of course, as we get into more of the cities and the towns, the towns of Rockcastle, we will get into more interesting, more good stories about, I guess, just the settling of Rockcastle and what was to come. Dana, where can all of our listeners find you?
Well, I appreciate you having me on. On Twitter, you can get me at dhopkins_9.
All right. Yes. Thanks for coming on and allowing me to talk to somebody besides myself. And
happy to.
And we'll get some more history about Rockcastle, and we'll have some Garrett County history coming soon as well. But you can connect to us on Facebook or Twitter at KY History Pod, or you can also check us out on YouTube at Kentucky History Channel. And if you want to watch on YouTube, you will get to see all those cool visuals, or at least that one map that we showed. So we'll try to have a little bit more visuals, I guess. Visuals are cool. That's all for this time. All right, we'll see you next time.